possibly nuclear weapon.
I want you to listen to something terrible that Mark Levine, who is promoted by Trump constantly, just said. It's just incredibly disturbing. Let me see, I think it's around 20. There we go. There he is. Listen to this.
Any other than Easter weekend? Apparently not. In fact, of course you couldn't. That's the point. Do it on Easter. Anyone who will accept this will accept any humiliation. In any case, here's what Mark Levine said on his Easter weekend show about what we ought to do next in Iran. Watch.
And the casualty numbers, as horrible as any casualty is, need some context. Let's look at World War II. The Battle of the Bulge, 80,000 to 90,000 plus casualties, deaths and injuries and so forth. Nearly 10% of all the casualties in World War II happened at the Battle of the Bulge near the end of the war. The Battle of Okinawa, 50,000 plus casualties, over 12,000, nearly 13,000 killed on that island, which is what convinced Truman that we would lose a million men if we didn't drop the atomic bombs that we did. So this is a war or a peace mission to stop nuclear weapons that can blow away millions of Americans. Every bit as important as World War II. This is a crucially important military operation, war, call it what you want, peace mission. And we ought to be celebrating the success of our military, unifying around our military and our commander-in-chief, and urging them to complete the task so our country is safe from nuclear weapons by insane, suicidal primitives from the 7th century.
Did you catch?
I can't even believe that he just said that. What a pig. What a monster of a man. And did you look what was behind him? Let's look at his background here. This poor man. He used his pawns. Look at the background. You see what's in the background? Now I see Lincoln. You really think Lincoln was 100% human? Because I don't. I think Lincoln was serpent seed. I think he was a giant. I think he had giant DNA. I think Lincoln was an incredibly evil man. And if you look at true Civil War history, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The bloodiest war in the Western Hemisphere because of that evil, wicked man that's behind this evil, wicked man. I don't know what to say to people who still support Donald Trump. God have mercy on their souls. I didn't want to cover this, Trump's Easter post, but, and I'm not a fan of Tucker Carlson either. I think he's got his own agendas, but he's making a hell of a lot more sense than a lot of people are right now. And this special that he did, I think it's worth checking out. I'm not going to cover any more. It's just too upsetting at this point. But certainly check out the full episode and let me know what you think. God bless.
Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Thursday, April 2nd, 2026. Colonel Douglas McGregor joins us now. Colonel McGregor, a pleasure. My dear friend, thank you for accommodating my schedule. Before we get to your analysis of the likelihood of a successful ground invasion in parts of Iran, I know there was some fake news out there yesterday about American officers killed in the UAE, but without addressing that, is it likely that more Americans have been injured or killed than we know about?
Yes, I don't think there's any question about that. Now, are they mostly ground personnel, people at the various bases that are being attacked and destroyed? I suspect that's the case. I was a little surprised that we had anybody left at the bases in the Persian Gulf, but it turns out we had quite a number there. So I think the answer is yes. And I think we're going to see more. And how many and how badly are they wounded and how many were killed? These numbers are kept very close hold right at the moment. We're just
Wow. It's almost like an IDF level of censorship in Israel that the Pentagon doesn't tell us how many of its own Americans have been injured.
No, I think so. But to be frank, we've gone through this before during World War I when we fought for only 110 days and we had 1,000 dead in every battle, which is staggering if you stop and think about it.
Yeah.
And 110,000 dead in only 110 days. That was held back. They slow rolled the casualties. We slow rolled them again during the European campaign in particular. So governments do this. This is not unique to the Trump government.
All right. Got it. You just indicated that you were surprised at the level of military personnel still present at American military bases in the Gulf. What purpose do those bases serve?
Well, that's a good question. We've had those. We essentially stepped into the shoes of the British Empire when the British finally withdrew in the 60s from the Persian Gulf. And we began this process really under President Carter of building up a capability there. And that was largely in response to what we thought was the Soviet threat from Afghanistan. We thought that the Soviets were ultimately interested in seizing the Persian Gulf. That was, by the way, an Israeli argument, and we responded to it by building bases. That wasn't the case, but it doesn't matter. We kept the bases. And effectively, this seemed to satisfy the interests of the Emirates. And the Emirates that line the area all were interested in having U.S. bases on the assumption that we would protect them, regardless of what happened. And they became increasingly sensitive because of Iran. Turns out we can't protect them. And that's this hard lesson that I think everybody in the region has learned.
But your understanding is that we have not evacuated these bases. We are still there.
Well, we have reports of soldiers that are assigned to these bases. They may be airmen too, maybe some naval personnel who moved into civilian areas. In other words, gone into the basements of apartment buildings and so forth because their bases were seriously attacked. People were killed, wounded. And that's not a long-term solution. I think, Judge, this falls into the category of having grossly underestimated the Iranian capability.
Right.
If we had accurately assessed it, then I think we would have gotten everybody out of the area.
The 10,000 ground troops, we'll get to the ground troops in a minute, their purpose and their mission, but where are they? These guys and women that have come from the U.S. in the past 2 weeks, the infantry and the Marines, are they at these U.S. bases?
No, not that I'm aware of. Now, they may have some individuals that have infiltrated to look at areas from which they could stage operations. That's eminently possible. And if you're going to stage an operation, you're looking at places like the UAE or Kuwait or Bahrain. But right now, we know that the latest group of Marines that came out went down to Diego Garcia. And the problem for us at the moment is that the fleet itself, our naval forces, have to be far enough away that they are not at risk of being targeted and sunk, let's put it bluntly. So you're hundreds of miles away from the entrance to the Persian Gulf. So the real question is, if you're that many miles away, how do you get individual soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines into the Persian Gulf region? Well, you've got to fly. And how do you fly them in? And how do you get the aircraft that are going to fly them around the Persian Gulf in there? Remember, the big problem that we confront, and this was something that I think we underestimated, is that the Iranians can see all the time. In other words, we call it persistent surveillance. They can see everything all the time inside their own country, as well as at least 1,000 miles beyond their borders. So it's very hard to fool someone or surprise someone under those circumstances. And they have access to Russian and Chinese satellite-based intelligence collection. They can also utilize that intelligence collection to listen to what people are saying on the ground. I know that shocks people, but it's absolutely a real capability. So if you're a lieutenant colonel giving instructions to a captain and you're standing near the shores in the Persian Gulf, the satellite could probably listen to your conversation. So this is a very challenging, very dangerous environment.
Colonel, did President Trump's speech to the nation last night persuade you to accept the thinking behind the invasion, the wisdom, if there is any, behind the invasion of Iran?
No, I mean,
did he make the case for war?
I don't think so. But what he did is he read from Mr. Netanyahu's talking points, the same sort of trope that we've been listening to for years about Iran, the state sponsor of terrorism, the most evil state on the planet, the worst people we've ever seen, terrible people, and so forth. I think a lot of people have heard this, and there are still people that are willingly believing it. But if you look at the track record, it's not the top state sponsor of terrorism by any stretch of the imagination. It hasn't been a terrorist state for a very long time. And he boasted about having approved the killing of General Soleimani. General Soleimani was helpful to us in Iraq in 2006, 2007 by brokering agreements with the Shiite Arabs in the country and getting them to stop fighting. And at the same time, they took Muqtada al-Sadr, who's a very prominent figure in Iraq and a Shiite cleric, brought him to Qom in Iran and said, "You're going to study theology, shut up, get in the corner, study theology, we'll let you know when you can come back." And then subsequently, his militias, Shiite militias, were instrumental in helping to crush ISIS. I know that we've had our hands in that on every conceivable side, but they did a lot of good work, and they rescued large numbers of non-Shiite Muslims, including Christians and Druze and others. So, this one-sided Israeli perspective that is force-fed to us on a daily basis was just repeated by Donald Trump. It's inaccurate, and it's devastating. It doesn't help us. And I think the thing that capped it off that frightened and upset and angered people all over the world was his assertion, well, we'll bomb them into the Stone Age back to where they belong. And this was sort of incomprehensible to people. Even at the height of some of the more terrible wars in which we've been engaged, no commander-in-chief, no president of the United States has ever uttered these kinds of phrases.
I mean, this was General Curtis LeMay at his worst. And you're right, I've never heard of a president pick up on that. Facially, it would be a war crime to bomb a civilization into the Stone Age. I want to play a little clip from the president last night because I don't know where he gets this information from, and it is defied by the entire intelligence community. I'm basing it on the assessment that Tulsi Gabbard made to Congress. Chris, number 4, please. Basing it on the assessment that Tulsi Gabbard made to Congress. Chris, number 4, please.
They were also rapidly building a vast stockpile of conventional ballistic missiles and would soon have had missiles that could reach the American homeland, Europe, and virtually any other place on Earth. Iran's strategy was so obvious. They wanted to produce as many missiles as possible, and they did, with the longest range possible, and they had some weapons that nobody believed they had. We just learned that out. We took them out. We took them all out so that no one would really dare stop them. and their race for a nuclear bomb, a nuclear weapon like nobody's ever seen before. They were right at the doorstep.
Oh, man.
Anybody believe that when it's defied by every intelligence analysis except the Mossad?
Well, the Mossad doesn't believe anything. It's there to transmit whatever the Israeli government wants to say. It's unfortunate that he continues to draw heavily on Israeli advice and expertise, but that's not surprising given the people that surround him. The bad news is as follows. First of all, he mentioned this arsenal of ballistic missiles. Yes, the Iranians have invested very heavily in those, precisely because they don't have a nuclear weapon. And the previous supreme leader had made it unambiguously clear that they would not build one. So they depended heavily on this arsenal of ballistic missiles and drones now to deter the Israelis from attacking them. Well, that hasn't worked. Secondly, these claims of having destroyed so many things, 90% this and 80%, well, if those things were the case, two things would be obvious. We would not witness any missile strikes from Iran. And every time someone opens their mouth and says, well, the Iranians don't have anything left, there's a major missile attack on Israel and a major missile attack on some of the Gulf Emirates. And they're all very precise, they're very accurate, and they're unstoppable now, largely because in Israel, they've run out of air defense missiles and their Iron Dome is defunct. So that's the first thing. Second thing is that we have a new supreme leader. And I think the interesting thing is that he has now eliminated any prohibitions on nuclear weapons development. So the very thing that President Trump says we are going to prevent is the very thing that is now absolutely, definitely going to happen. Now, I don't know when or how, but if you're in the Iranian position, or for that matter, you're any middle-sized power around the world, you're beginning to understand that if you don't have a nuclear weapon at your disposal, then you're at risk of attack by the United States and Israel without any notice on the basis of dubious intelligence. So I think what we've done is we've now proliferated nuclear weapons. And this new round doesn't make any sense. If you're as successful as he was saying we are, in addition to not witnessing any more drone or missile attacks, why would you ever need ground forces? I mean, after all, the promise was we're never going to use ground forces. Air and missile attack is going to work. And the expectation was that this place would fall apart in 96 hours. All right, it hasn't worked. We've gone through 3 weeks of this very intensive bombing. 11,000 precision munitions have been expended, billions of dollars spent, and that's not enough. So we've got to go back in and do what now? Repeat it? Only this time we're going to add the use of ground forces on a limited basis as part of the broader mix. None of what he says hangs together in a purely logical sense.
Perhaps the most extreme statement he made last night, and I got to tell you, I disagree with him on so many things. I have known him for 40 years. I felt sorry for him. He was not at his best last night. He looked exhausted, almost addled, but all right, we all have days like that. But the most extreme thing I think he said last night was that if he had not torn up the JCPOA, which provided for American inspectors in Iran, there would be no Israel today. This is just about 20 seconds. Chris, cut number 2.
There would have been no Middle East and no Israel right now, in my opinion, the opinion of a lot of great experts, had I not terminated that terrible deal. And I was so honored to do it. I was so proud to do it. It was so bad right from the beginning. Essentially, I did what no other president was willing to do. They made mistakes, and I am correcting them.
Who can believe that?
Well, I'd say there's still substantial numbers of Americans who do believe it. I talk routinely to many of my peers, and they are absolutely obsessed with the destruction of Iran. And when you raise the issue, we have no interest in the destruction of this society or its state. They fly into a rage. You inevitably end up being branded an anti-Semite, God knows what else. It's not a rational conversation.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to reverse 30 years of systematic misinformation or disinformation through the mainstream media from the Israeli source and its agents in the United States. It's just very difficult to defeat that. And that's how they've gained control of our government, not just through payments, which are obviously a big part of it, but by beating this drum of hatred and fear that is designed to bring us into a destructive war with Iran. It has. The problem now is there was also absolutely no appreciation for the damage being done to the rest of the world. That's the worst part. We have acted in a vacuum. If you look at Korea, you look at Japan right now, plastics industries are shutting down. You know, there are 47 individual critical products that require petroleum. And they're all in terrible shape. And India is having a terrible time. And we haven't even talked about food, fuel, feedstock, and ultimately fertilizer. These things are desperately needed all across the world. We're staring at famine now in the not too distant future. Well, one of the hopes was that this would end on humanitarian grounds, that the president would say, you know, I've examined this. We've done a great deal of damage, and I'm ending this conflict because I recognize the terrible implications for the rest of the world. We don't want people in this world experiencing famine, starving to death. We don't want people that can't get access to water. So we're going to find another way to move forward. And I'm talking to our friends and potential intermediaries in the international system. That was all gone. There was no mention of it, no sense whatsoever that this reckless action has really disrupted the global economy.
How reckless, even incompetent, would you say was the Pentagon's war plans?
Well,
don't let me put words in your mouth. I know you've been critical, as everybody on this show.
We have to understand that you have this permanent institutionalized group of airmen. They're largely Air Force, also include some people in the Navy, and they are continually trying to realize Mitchell's dream. Mitchell's dream, or Duhay's dream, they were believers that if you bombed the enemy long enough in his home country, it would break the enemy would surrender, and you would not have to use any ground forces. General Arnold, who was a very fine man, and during the Second World War, he was the de facto chief of staff of the Air Force for Marshall. He arrived in Great Britain in 1942 and said, this is the first time in history that we are in a position to demonstrate that we can defeat Germany without ever putting a single soldier on French soil. It's never worked. It's always failed. And what you get is this utterly unrealistic expectation of the air power's success with missiles and aircraft. It fails, and then inevitably somebody comes back and says, well, I guess we have to use ground forces. It's a disaster, and I don't know what happened privately, and people say, well, you know, this General Kane, he's a very solid guy. Well, I don't see any reason to believe otherwise, but let's be frank. He was not brought out of retirement as a 3-star, promoted to 4 stars, and then asked to put something together and then tell the president it can't be done. I mean, that's not why he was selected.
Right.
Selected to put up opposition to this. It's a very dumb idea. I mean, you know, we could not bring Serbia to its knees through 78 days of relentless air campaign using all the capabilities that we had. It took bribery and negotiations in Moscow with Strobe Talbot, who was the Deputy Secretary of Defense, to persuade the Serbs that they had to go, because the Russians simply told the Serbs, we can't supply you with food and sustenance and fuel for heating. And frankly, the Serbs knew that, you know, at least 1 million of their population risked death if they couldn't feed and heat things through the Balkan winter. So it hasn't worked. I don't think it will work. And I don't think doing the same thing that we've done in the past is going to work again in Iran. I mean, how many times do you hit the targets? And again, you run out of targets at some point. Then you hit the other targets and say, well, now this time we'll really get it. And it usually doesn't work. Then you do a lot of infrastructure damage. And in retrospect, people look at what you destroyed and said, what the Yugo factory that builds Yugo automobiles, this is what we destroyed? Well, it had potential military utility. Nonsense. We're going to see the same thing after this war is over in Iran. We're going to see places that were bombed that had no military utility, but we were desperate to bring this home as a success. And that's part of why ground troops are being involved, I suspect.
The Colonel of the Washington Post reports, I could stop right there, meaning the CIA is leaking.
That's right.
That President Trump has ordered the Pentagon to plan a commando raid to seize Iran. This is almost sounds like science fiction. To seize Iran's enriched uranium. Now, how reckless is that?
Well, first, let me be quite frank about the special operations forces that we're talking about. They're superb. They're excellent. And they will exploit every capability that we have in order to make this mission a success. I don't think it's going to work because it's in the same category as looking for a needle in a haystack. It's not going to work because you've got to go into the country. And you've got a country now that has this advantage of persistent surveillance of everything, everywhere, all the time. They have 1 million men under arms, and they have large numbers of systems, air defense systems, air and missile defense systems. And you put it all together, it's not going to be very difficult to detect them. And if they detect them, they're going to be attacked. And a special operations unit is extremely vulnerable. That's why it depends very heavily on the absolutely best and most perfect intelligence that you can provide. So if we do this, I'm sure they will have some plan to deal with multiple points, because I don't think the enriched uranium is going to be located at a particular point. There won't be a sign that says, here's the enriched uranium, come and get it. Now, that doesn't mean that they couldn't spoof us. They've already used a lot of decoys that have fooled our airstrikes. You could conceivably see the distribution of some enriched uranium in various places that give off a signal that then demands inspection or attention. In other words, I'm trying to say the people involved with this on the military side are among the very best, and they will do the best they can. I just don't think it's a legit, well, it's not that it's illegitimate, it's just not attainable.
Last night, the president pretty much admitted that the civilian assets are targets of the American Air Force. I want to ask you about that after we listen to him. It's not very long. It's less than 30 seconds. Chris, cut number 6.
The new group is less radical and much more reasonable. Yet if during this period of time no deal is made, we have our eyes on key targets. If there is no deal, we are going to hit each and every one of their electric generating plants very hard and probably simultaneously. We have not hit their oil, even though that's the easiest target of all, because it would not give them even a small chance of survival or rebuilding.
If he targets civilian assets, that's a war crime, isn't it?
Well, we've certainly done it many times before. Heating electric plants and heat plants designed to provide the energy to heat homes have been bombed before. It goes back to what I said something before. If you've already hit what you consider to be the critical military targets and it hasn't worked, you then begin to expand your portfolio of targets. What he's saying is, listen, we're going to go after everything and anything we can if you don't submit to us. Well, here's a big newsflash. The Iranians are not going to submit to Israel because in the final analysis, they're not submitting to us. We're enforcing Israeli dominance on them. We've said effectively, you either do what Mr. Netanyahu demands or we'll bomb you into the Stone Age. That's effectively the argument. That's what he said last night. The Iranians are not going to submit to that. Anybody who knows anything about them and about that country, its history, its philosophy of life, that's not going to happen. So, are we going to send anybody to be tried for war crimes on this basis? Well, it hasn't happened in the past. I remember Curtis LeMay famously said shortly before the war ended, men, if we don't win this war, we're all going to be tried as war criminals. Well, he was right. We won the war. So we try other people for war crimes.
Right.
That's the simple truth, Judge.
How dangerous is it to introduce ground troops?
Well, it's dangerous
for whatever purpose, to take over an island or to look for these 50 different hiding places of uranium.
Well, we talked about the special ops employment inside Iran. That's highly dangerous for obvious reasons. And we've covered that. Now let's talk about these other ideas that are associated with seizing islands. First, The fleet is hundreds of miles away. So, and most of our air bases from which we're flying strikes are hundreds of miles away. We've lost a number of our tankers. So the first issue is, how do you get a significant number of troops, Marines, soldiers, whatever, into a specific location in proximity to one of the targets in the Persian Gulf? Well, that's a challenge. You know, how do you get them there to begin with? Can they get in? Can they slip through without being noticed? Then you move across open water to seize a location. And you think you're going to be able to do that without being detected? Are you absolutely sure there are no shoulder-fired air defense systems, which, as I understand, are actually pretty plentiful in the area? And then once you put them there, assuming you get them all there, how do you sustain them? Are you going to keep 60, 70, 80 aircraft in the air 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, orbiting, trying to protect these very vulnerable forces from being destroyed? And that's going to be a tough thing to do, because the response will be tactical ballistic missiles and drones. And we know from experience that you're not going to knock them all down. A lot of them are going to get through. What's a lot mean? Well, it doesn't mean very much. You get 2 or 3 tactical ballistic missiles on an island that's only 14, 15 square kilometers, you pretty much had it. You know, I used a quote that was in the recent article that was published in my Substack. And I quoted Robert Work, who was a former Deputy Secretary of Defense during the Obama years. And Secretary of Work previously had been a captain in the Marine Corps. He was an artilleryman. And he put this together with Frank Hoffman, and he has this wonderful quote that explains that we are not going to use Marines in an amphibious capacity in an environment where you have networked intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance platforms above, with strike systems, numerous strike systems distributed over a wide area, because we can't protect them. And until we're absolutely sure that this networked system of strike systems and intelligence collection platforms have been destroyed or neutralized, we're not going to launch a major amphibious operation. Well, he was right. And that is true. We are now living in this new world. So whether it's an airborne insertion, an air mobile insertion, which I suspect is more likely, whatever it is, it's going to be a super high risk operation. There's no question about it. It doesn't have anything to do with how capable those soldiers and Marines may be on the ground. It's not up to them. It's a simple fact of life. It's a dangerous, dangerous setting.
Colonel McGregor.
Friends, we need to have our military personnel, our generals, start to fight back. This reminds me of the way that Hitler operated during the war. Now, he had this one general, this is Desert Fox. He was highly respected throughout the world, even by his enemies. He was a good man, but he was under the control of Hitler. Now, he was supposed to meet Churchill on the battlefield, but when he saw that he was completely outnumbered and knew that his troops would be slaughtered, he sent word to Hitler. Now, a messenger came back from Hitler saying, "I don't care. We do not retreat. Retreat makes us look weak. If you have to all die, so be it. You're going to go to war." However, Desert Fox refused, and he sent his troops home. He retired back to his home, where the SS picked him up soon after. They gave him 2 choices: to take the pill, the suicide pill, or they would rape and murder his wife and daughters. He took the suicide pill. And as to use him as a lesson, they stripped him naked and hung him in his town square and left his body there to rot. This is the kind of behavior we're seeing out of Donald Trump. We can continue to pray for Donald Trump, but I think at this point it's like beating a dead horse. We need to pray for these generals to have enough guts to refuse their orders and protect our soldiers and the world, for that matter. So please, let's pray for the generals. Let's pray for our soldiers that they refuse to fight this illegal war. And let's support them when they do.